So how is substance use disorder diagnosed? It's diagnosed in this way. In the behavioral health field, professionals use what's called a diagnostic statistical manual of mental disorders. And behavioral health falls under this manual of mental disorders, and substance use disorder falls under the category or classification as a behavioral health disorder. And what we see here are the 11 criteria for substance use disorder. You will see taking the substance in larger amounts or for longer than you meant to, wanting to cut down or stop using the substance but not managing to, spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from use of the substance, cravings and urges to use, not managing to do what you should at work, at home, or at school because of substance use, because of the obsession, because of the compulsion, because of the cravings, or because of the impaired brain functioning. Continuing to use even when it causes problems in relationships, giving up important social, occupational, recreational activities because of substance use, using again and again, even when it puts you in danger. I know this is pretty common. I know for folks who get behind the wheel with impaired decision-making, that's danger. But for the person who is actively using, they don't perceive it as potential danger. Continuing to use even when you know you have a physical or psychological problem that could have been caused or made worse by the substance use. You could see this in people with liver cancer or folks who have perhaps endocarditis or a soft tissue infection because of injection drug use. They continue to use even though they know the cause of it was the use of the substance. Needing more of the substance to get the effect you want, and development of withdrawal symptoms, which can be relieved by taking more of the substance. And one of the things that I really need to and want to point out here and hone in on is that all of these criteria, there's 11 criteria, and all of them are behavioral conditions. None of them say your white blood cell count is down, or your red blood cell count is high, or your lungs are working properly because of fluid. None of these conditions, none of these criteria have any sort of medical or clinical relationship. They are all behavioral. And that's important as we think about substance use disorder and how do we help individuals achieve their drug use goals or achieve sustainable recovery without the use of a prescription drug or magic pill, right? There is no remedy for substance use disorder that comes in the form of a prescription. There's certainly medication-assisted therapy and medication-assisted programs that are accompanied by behavioral health programs. So we want to be thinking about substance use disorder as a behavioral disorder. Now, the criteria is to be diagnosed by a licensed individual, like by a licensed professional, is 2 or 3 of these symptoms is mild substance use disorder, 4 or 5 of these symptoms is moderate, and more than 6 symptoms is severe. Now, this is important because without this diagnosis, an individual is unable to get into a treatment program in the absence of a diagnosis. So, for example, in my case, my ex kept insisting that I go into a 28-day treatment program. Well, first of all, I didn't have any insurance. Second of all, I was never diagnosed with substance use disorder, and I didn't even know how to go about doing that. And third, by the time this conversation was happening and it was being forced upon me to go into a treatment program, I had already been sober for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days. And when you are not impaired, you cannot get into a treatment program. So that's a pretty critical thing to know when we have ideas and assumptions that, why don't you just go into a treatment program? Well, because I might not be able to get into one for a variety of reasons, okay? Now let's take a look at habit versus addiction. Some people have habits like drinking your coffee first thing in the morning, tying your left shoe first, getting out of bed on the same side, maybe always having a cookie with a glass of milk before you go to bed. Those are habits, they're routines, they're rituals that you have incorporated into your daily life. A habit is a routine or regular behavior that gets harder to change the longer the behavior goes on. So if you're this type of person that's been drinking your coffee at the same time, maybe you drink 2 cups between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. and you have another behavior associated with it, like maybe you read the newspaper at the same time you're drinking your coffee, or you watch the news, the longer that you have that behavior, that established ritual, the harder it's going to become to change. Because what happens is our brain creates these pathways, right? These cells, and our brain likes to be in its comfort zone. And so to change that, we've got to be very consistent and recreate different pathways in the brain. Well, that's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Now, addiction, on the other hand, once the behaviors become habits, the behavior themselves becomes part of the disease. The behavior becomes the lifestyle, and the lifestyle becomes part of the disease of addiction. What do I mean by that? In addition to changing behaviors, such as discontinuing use, an individual also has to change all of the behaviors associated with that use. Let me use the coffee and the newspaper. If you want to stop drinking coffee in the morning, you're going to have to substitute that behavior if you're going to continue to read the paper in the morning. So maybe you substitute it with a glass of juice. All the behaviors associated with drug use also need to change at the same time. They become part of the addiction. One example that I can offer you is that every time I went grocery shopping, the first thing I would do is go over to the liquor store and buy a couple of little nips. And I always timed my grocery store shopping to the time that the liquor store opened. So it was 10 o'clock. I wouldn't go grocery shopping before 10 o'clock. I'd pop into the liquor store, buy a couple of nips, go back into my car and drink them, and then proceed to go grocery shopping. I had to change that behavior of going to the grocery store at 10 o'clock and waiting for the liquor store to open in order to purchase the nips to achieve successful recovery. That's just one minor small example. So drug addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, right? I continued to use in the grocery store. Once I got in the grocery store, I bought a little bottle of wine, plastic cardboard thing that looks like a milk carton, and I would go in the bathroom and drink there. And long-lasting changes in the brain. It is considered both a complex brain disorder and a mental illness. I want to look at some differences between substance use disorder and some similarities, and chronic disease. In substance use disorder, there is no magic pill or prescription to take to facilitate healing, to guarantee the road to wellness. There's normal brain functioning deficit with addiction and substance use disorder as a result of prolonged drug or alcohol use. There's a brain functioning deficit that has happened, and we'll look at that in a minute. And number 3, stigma prevents those suffering from asking for help. Now, I'm familiar with this with HIV/AIDS back in the 80s. when there was a lot of stigma, and there still is, around HIV/AIDS, that it prevented people from seeking treatment because they were ashamed of what others might think, of how they contracted the disease. Similarly, it was those with breast cancer also experienced stigma when breast cancer first started to become prevalent as a diagnosis. And those who had breast cancer also experienced stigma. And it's almost like it's a normal progression in our society that when something surfaces that we have no education or information around, then we're afraid of it and we form judgments. So I'm going to refer you back to the original slide that we had. When was judgment ever helpful? If you don't have enough information about something, you shouldn't be forming a judgment around it, especially one that's negative, because it causes harm to people. And that's what has happened with many, many diseases, and now substance use disorder. And we're actually in a really good place in this world that we're having these discussions, and stigma and education are improving. So some of the similarities with other chronic diseases is that lifestyle change is essential. Adopting new healthy behaviors improves outcomes, like many other chronic diseases. Healthy behaviors improves outcomes. Number 2, support and encouragement are critical to the success of the individual. Achieving behavior change or lifestyle change or any change in your life is hard enough on its own, especially if they become part of our rituals or routines, that we're human beings and we thrive on support and encouragement. And substance use disorder is no different. And 3, outcomes rely heavily on continuous daily management. Successful, sustainable recovery is a daily job. Because if an individual had the habit and that ritual and the compulsion to use every day for however many years that they decided to use, that still exists in their brain, right? There are memories in there, and that goes into a much deeper understanding of addiction and the brain that you'll be able to learn more about by watching one of the movies I'll recommend. But outcomes rely on continuous daily management. And lastly, genetics. Genetics is a similarity in all chronic diseases: asthma, heart disease, depression, cardiovascular. It's the same with addiction. Substance use disorder can be transferred down through genetics. It can be hereditary. It's not always, but it certainly plays a big part, just like every other chronic disease. So this is from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, defining addiction as a chronic disease, relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. It is considered both a complex brain disorder and a mental illness. We saw this a little bit earlier. I wanted to point out that this is the definition by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I'm going to introduce you to the movie called Pleasure Unwoven. This movie was created by Dr. Kevin McCauley, who is a person in long-term recovery, and he wanted to understand how he became addicted to alcohol. And so he went on this really thorough research project to learn about addiction, and he shares it with us in this video. It's called Pleasure Unwoven. The video itself is about 1 hour and 6 minutes long, and it is available on Vimeo and on Dr. Kevin McCauley's website. I'm going to show you 2 clips from it, and I hope that you do move on to purchase the video. It is a great educational tool for recovery centers, for loved ones, for people experiencing substance use disorders themselves. Hey there, this is Ginger. I hope you're learning a lot from this series. I'm asking for your help in supporting my tireless efforts. There's a few ways in which you can support me. Tell your friends about this video series, subscribe and like each video here on YouTube down below. make a donation on my website, or invite me to deliver this training in person. Together, we can all be part of the solution. Hope to see you soon, and thank you.